All right, RJ, we are back for another episode of the Red Glare podcast. Super excited to, kind of do a little post-mortem on the teams that left us in round one. But really, we're going to focus on these round two matchups because, that was arguably the most exciting first round of NHL playoff hockey that we've seen in a really long time, just with all the game sevens, all the tight series. I had so much fun watching it. I just can't wait for more.
I did too, and I think we were kind of repaid toward the end of those series for all the blowouts early on. And we were talking about this early in the first round where we were just like, are we going to get an exciting game, actually? A close game, please? And with all the series, going pretty late, except for the Colorado-Nashville one, got a lot of excitement. And then how about two really close game sevens yesterday? Just way to end that round. Just great ending.
Yeah, no, both overtime. Like you can't ask for
Yep.
more than overtime game sevens. Like it doesn't get better than that. So that's awesome. We'll for sure dig into all that stuff. But there is other league wide news from today that we do have to address, and that is Pete DeBoer being fired by the Vegas Golden Knights after just a couple seasons, RJ. First, is it just because he missed the playoffs with them? Is this just Vegas doing Vegas stuff? I mean, they're going to be on their third coach in only, 5.5-ish years.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. Vegas doing Vegas stuff, certainly there's potential that that's what it is. And we know how Vegas operates. If they feel that there's a chance they could even get 1% better, they're going to go and do that. And with Barry Trotz on the market, I think there's a chance that you can improve not just by 1%, but by even more than that. Barry Trotz, of course, I think being the best coach in the NHL. I think the Golden Knights, the way that they operate, they're going to go try and pursue that. I think he'd be a great fit there. And I think they also wanted to wait to see what the landscape looked like as far as coaches that were available. I think if Trotz doesn't hit the market, there's actually a decent chance that DeBoer returns. But given that this is the case, I'm not all that surprised they let him go.
That is going to be kind of one of these great what ifs in the NHL. And I know there's like tons of actually better ones than this, but certainly as I'm looking at it right now, because I don't know, just based on the comments that like Foley made and stuff coming in, talking about how he wants to be more hands on and talking about all the stuff that he wants to see from this team and feeling like they got away from some stuff. And I still think that there was, I don't know that DeBoer would have been there regardless. You know what I mean? And the other name that no one's talking about because everybody's focused on Trotz, and I agree, this job is Trotz if he wants it, because Vegas will
Yes.
offer him, a blank check, basically. So the only reason Trotz doesn't end up in Vegas is if he chooses not to. But I'm still going to hold by this whole Joel Quenneville is out there. All he's got to do is meet with Gary Bettman, and he's back in the league. And I think Vegas is aware of that too. And I think he might be kind of, a plan B option for them in their minds.
Right. And I think you were the first person that I heard mention this. I heard some more, kind of national names talk about it a little bit after. But yeah, Joel Quenneville, I think probably is an option for Vegas and someone that they would be looking at if Barry Trotz is not their guy. I think Trotz would probably be their first choice,
Mm-hmm.
but I could see them going after Quenneville. You take all of the Blackhawk stuff out of it, and I think he can still be, an effective coach. I still think, you take the whole picture into account, and he's probably not a guy that you should be bringing into your organization, especially when you already have troubles
Yeah.
as far as, cultural troubles. But it's something that I could see Vegas doing. And as soon as you mentioned it too, you first mentioned it, I'm like, oh, they would do that, wouldn't they? So that could be another option. And I think so they do see maybe they do have a plan B if Trotz doesn't want to come there. And I do kind of agree with your point that maybe DeBoer wasn't totally safe even if Trotz doesn't hit the market, because my second point with this is that Vegas needed a scapegoat. After what happened this past season, you need someone to put the blame on. It's just inexcusable. It doesn't go up to their standards, not making the playoffs. Simple as that. And I think DeBoer was the easiest scapegoat to choose. Because I do think that they wanted to give management one more shot.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
Yeah, coaches often are, right? They are the person who takes
Mm-hmm.
the fall. They are the fall guy for a lot of this stuff. Management can survive a couple coaching regimes. That's kind of how it goes. Um, Yeah, I think he was out. I think the other thing that, you touched on Twitter earlier, I don't know that he was going to be able to exist with Robin Leonard there. And the Gold
Mhm.
Knights, at least as of this moment, very much tied to Robin Leonard being their goaltender of the future. And given the friction between the two of them from this, last month and a half especially, I don't know how that relationship works day in, day out without it festering into something that no locker room wants to have to deal with.
Exactly. I don't know that the two of them could have coexisted. It's just a tough situation from the start there, and we'll get into this a little bit later. I don't. DeBoer has also been kind of put in a bad spot with his goalie situation over the last few years, the way that management has handled it, and with Fleury gone and Leonard being brought in. But it would have been a tough situation there, and I think that's also something that management probably wanted to avoid. And if you are, the GM, you basically committed to bringing in Leonard as soon as you brought him in to replace Marc-Andre Fleury. So you're going to want to keep him around. You're going to have some ties to him. And especially if you have to get rid of Leonard, then
Mm-hmm.
that's admitting a total failure on your part. And I don't think that the front office wants to do that.
No, probably not. So now I'm going to give you an opportunity, RJ, to defend Pete DeBoer. We all know that you're someone who very much believes in his abilities as a coach. And look, to an extent, his record speaks for itself. He's had numerous successes. He's had playoff success despite not having a Stanley Cup victory under his belt. But at the same time, this is a guy who has come into four different teams now, coached very, very well, but been let go in pretty short order despite all of those successes. So, my question to you, RJ, is that a coincidence? Because if so, that's a hell of a coincidence. Because I'm looking at this happening four times in a row. That seems a little bit more like a pattern to me.
Right. And I think it actually is a hell of a coincidence, not necessarily a pattern. I mean, we'll start with this. The average NHL coaching tenure is 2.4 years.
Mm-hmm.
So in all of his, tenures with all four of those teams, he's surpassed that amount of time. Now, you could make the argument certainly that given the above average results, you would expect his time at each team to last an above average amount of time. And so, that would make sense. But I think in each situation, I'm going to kind of break down all the situations, but I think he was unfortunate enough to have kind of caught the tail end of a lot of these competitive windows for certain teams. And by the end of that time, by his third, fourth year, was given teams that really nobody could have even coached into the playoffs. And the team was ready for a different type of coach. Peter DeBoer, he's a win now coach. I think we can both agree on
Mm-hmm.
this. He's not necessarily a development coach. He is a win now coach. You
Yeah.
want him coaching a competitive team. And by the time he was done with some of these teams, I'm really going to go in on like New Jersey and San Jose. They were no longer teams ready to compete. And so they were looking for someone else. But let's start with Florida. His first stint in Florida, 0809, he starts there. It's his first job as an NHL head coach and leads him to a respectable 93 points. And this is not a particularly great Florida team for any of his years there. And this is the one that doesn't exactly follow the trend, I guess. I almost kind of write this one off because it's his first NHL head
Yeah.
coaching stint. I think Florida DeBoer is a very different coach than New Jersey, San Jose, and Vegas DeBoer. I think he learned a lot of lessons there. And you look at those Florida teams. They were not good. They kind of cycled through a lot of different coaches that
Yeah.
couldn't get things figured out there. I mean, you look at Stephen Weiss was his team's leading scorer every single season
Yeah.
he was there in Florida. So I won't spend too much time on that one. And I think what we're really talking about is
Yeah.
New Jersey, San Jose, and Vegas. So I'll move on there. But you look at New Jersey, and I think it's pretty similar to San Jose. But really, you get into this question. I know Jeff Merrick likes to kind of bring this up. This is one of my favorite Merrickisms. Is this a problem of coaching or composition? When you look at a team that's not doing well. And I think New Jersey is the first case, well, Florida also, but where composition is the issue. He leads the Devils to the Stanley Cup final in his first season there. Really impressive run, I think. And you tweeted earlier today that, maybe he has kind of a problem setting expectations too high for himself. And I'd agree with you there, with that kind of success, because that Devils team had no business being in the
No.
Stanley Cup finals. That's one of the worst teams to ever make the cup final. But I think that's just impressive on Peter DeBoer getting them there. But it did kind of set expectations too high. But then you look at that next season, and you've got Zach Parise then leaving for Minnesota, and that's a big part of their team that's now gone. And Martin Brodeur is a year older. Like you're kind of running on fumes here with where this Devils team is at. And by the time you reach the next season, you've got a 36-year-old Patrick Elias as your leading scorer, like for reference. The season after that, a 41-year-old Jaromir Jagr is your team's leading scorer. I mean, they're just problems on problems there, and the team just wasn't built to really compete after that. He still got that team with Jagr on it, 88 points somehow. I don't know how he managed to do that. But at a certain point, I think the Devils were just ready for a rebuild after all those years of success that they had. And DeBoer isn't necessarily the coach you want doing that. So I think that was part of why they let him go. And, further proof, the Devils have only won one playoff game since DeBoer was let go. It's been a long time.
Yeah, no, they've had issues for sure.
Right. And so then moving into San Jose, does a great job in his first season. They're coming off a non-playoff year, leads them to the Stanley Cup final, does something no other coach was able to do, because I think in a lot of ways, leadership-wise, he was kind of the opposite of Todd McClellan. Great motivator, knows how to press the right buttons and have that message to his team. Has a couple good seasons after that, and then leads them again to the Western Conference final in 2019. So the message clearly hadn't worn out at that point. I think that Sharks team was plenty motivated, if not for a lot of, concussions, head injuries in that third round where they're missing Pavelski, Hurdle, all these guys. I think they've got a real chance there. But that's a successful season, more or less. I don't think the message wore out at that point. But then you get to the next season, and Joe Pavelski is gone, and Joe Thornton is another year older. And nobody really knew it at the time, but that Sharks team was bottom dweller talent-wise. And it was such a hard fall that it felt like, oh, wow, DeBoer is kind of doing something wrong here. And the Sharks, I think they were kind of forced into a situation where they had to fire him, not necessarily because of any poor relations with the players or anything he did wrong, but the Sharks were desperate. They were trying to get one more cup run out of Joe Thornton's time in San Jose. And they didn't know it at the time, but that team was not going to be ready to compete for a long time. And so you look at, is this a problem of coaching or composition? I think it's composition. And the future seasons after that have kind of shown where the issue with composition was. I don't know that any coach really gets those San Jose teams of the last 3-4 years to the playoffs. I mean, they're just kind of so fundamentally flawed in how they're built. And with those aging players and Pavelski not around. And you look at the culture too. The next season, after DeBoer is gone and Bugner is the head coach, it got a hell of a lot worse. I mean, it just completely broke down. The players kind of hated each other. So I don't know that that's necessarily DeBoer's fault while he's there. So that's San Jose. And then you get to Vegas. And I think he had a lot of success with Vegas, early on, certainly. That's never the argument. He's got success early on. And then this season, I mean, you can talk about the injuries. You can talk about the team culture. I think it's a little bit of both. But the injuries are not his fault. I still think they could have done better despite the injuries. Like, do I think DeBoer could have handled this season better? Absolutely. For sure. But do I think that Vegas's issues kind of begin with him, or that he's the main reason for it? No, I think kind of the organizational rot goes all the way up to the top. And he was just put in a really bad spot that he could have handled better, but so much going on around him. So that's kind of my argument. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I mean, you bring up good points, and those are things that are evident if you look at it all. I think my biggest argument for why I maybe question his coaching ability and where I would rank him amongst, coaches and maybe not available coaches, just because there's not a ton of great ones out there, is just given his style and the systems he uses and his just fascination with Steve Spott's power plays. Like, these are the things that I question. He's a little bit more of a defensive minded guy. Kind of best way of playing defense is just to, keep possession of the puck and do it that way. And obviously that helps a lot in the playoffs, and I think that's why his teams have had a lot of playoff success. But in the regular season, it's not always how hockey's played. It's not necessarily the best path to get there. And I think the Knights kind of struggled with that down the stretch this year, was they were playing that kind of style, but at some point they needed to just say, hey, despite these injuries, we've still got the more talented team. Let's just go out there and score, and let's just try to win these games and get into the playoffs, and then we can focus on that kind of stuff. Um, and I just wonder, based on what we're seeing, do you think that that style is maybe just losing a step as the league continues to get more and more focused on skill and speed and all of that stuff? Do you think that DeBoer's kind of style of puck possession and all that stuff might just be getting a little, I don't want to say outdated, but I can't really think of a better word for it right now.
Right. And I
Stale.
don't think, yeah, stale is a word I was thinking. I don't think so. I think what's more important is that with a coach like DeBoer, the personnel has to match the systems.
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably even more important with his, the way that he likes to have his teams play hockey as opposed to some other coaches. And I think with Vegas, you saw a really bad mismatch because you look at the Vegas team under Gerard Gallant and how successful they were generating a lot of offense off the rush. They were kind of a speed team, will hit you in transition really quickly, and they were built that way. They were pretty much like purpose built that way out of the
Yeah.
expansion draft. There was this clear mindset of this is how this team is going to play, and everyone was on board with it. And that's one of the reasons they did so well in their first season too. They were kind of tailor made around that. Now DeBoer is almost the complete opposite. The way that his teams attack, they spend a lot of time in the offensive zone, possessing the puck. They work the puck around the outside a lot. They like to funnel it to the point and get shots from there. And Vegas, the roster was not built to succeed that way. They were built to generate offense on the rush. And yes, you do have defensemen like a Shea Theodore, and they even brought in Alex Pietrangelo. But Shea Theodore, I don't think of him as a guy who kind of generates his offense from that spot. He's a good puck mover, and he's good at jumping up on the rush and activating.
Yep,
That's exactly how he operates. And you saw that Theodore wasn't really himself for large parts of DeBoer's tenure there. So I just think you had a really bad mismatch of the systems versus the personnel. And you look in San Jose where they had so much success. You've got Brent Burns firing league leading amounts of shots from the point. And you've got Joe Pavelski, the best tipper of the puck in the NHL, standing out in front of the net. And Hurdle was pretty good at tipping the puck too. You've got those guys where it fits the system really well. And I think that's one of the reasons he was able to have a lot of success there.
Yep, and that brings it back around to that age-old question of, when you're a coach hired for a position in sports, do you try to force everybody into your system and work with management to build the roster to fit your system, or do you adapt your system to the players you have available to you? And that's kind of something that, that's something I don't know that we'll ever know an answer to, of what the better way is. I think in hockey, it's especially interesting, just given kind of the shorter lifespan of coaches, as you talked about earlier, and just kind of how much harder it is to move around your pieces, especially your core, given the salary cap and everything. It's not always that easy. So I do think that it comes down to, you have to make sure when hiring a coach that you hire someone who can work with the pieces you already have. And yes, that was an issue in Vegas there. I think it's a little different in something like the NFL, where people move all around. I think if you're a coach in the NFL, you got to adjust to what you have to work with. It seems like that works better there. But yeah, so there's our talk about DeBoer. Like I said, I know I argue and fight with you on Twitter about it, and I make comments about it here and tease you about it, your love affair with him. But I acknowledge he's a good coach. He's gotten stuff done. Like I said, I worry maybe his system's a little stale, but maybe it's just been a personnel thing. Time will tell. We'll see where he goes. Not many openings out there though. They're kind of closing as things are
it'll
going.
be interesting.
So
yeah,
it's going to be interesting for him for sure. All right, so playoff time. That's why we're here. It's really why everyone's here. Let's go ahead and break down these round 2 matchups, and we'll say some words about the teams that left us in round 1. We'll do what we've been doing. We're going to go, focus on the Western Conference first because it's the best. And we'll start with this Colorado and St. Louis matchup, RJ. Now, you and I have both been on record, said whoever was going to win that St. Louis Minnesota series is winning the West. I see no reason to change my mind about that. I like St. Louis in this series.
Agreed. I stand by that prediction. And despite the Avs, well, I don't even want to say despite, the Avs sweeping their first round opponent, Nashville. In some ways, I think that might even be worse for them, that things never really got difficult. I think they, only trailed for, 4 minutes in that entire series. Yeah, I've been on record saying as soon as things get difficult for the Avs, they crumble. And things have yet to get difficult for them, but I'm sure they will at some point in the series against St. Louis. It's going to be a big test for them. The Blues are a very good team. They've got a lot more speed and skill than in past years. They showed that against Minnesota. This one, I think, has certainly the potential to be the best series in the second round.
Yeah, I think so as well. It's going to be interesting in the regular season. St. Louis lost this matchup 2-1 against Colorado, but all of these games were played super, super close. All of them. You're talking about 11 goals in the 3 games for St. Louis, 12 for Colorado. That's, it's basically dead tied. It's going to be really interesting. I feel like a lot of, what helps Colorado out is their ability to activate guys on the back end, CAR-NYR especially, but I feel like St. Louis has the forwards and the depth at forward where they can really commit like whole lines to stopping that with their forwards, with their wingers especially, and just put a stop to that. Just, body him up, make him earn it. And I think having to face that is not necessarily going to be something that Makar has had to face before, and even if he's, good enough to overcome it, which I do think he is, he's that skilled, it's going to take him a couple games. He's going to have to work for it, and he's going to have to figure it out. It is not going to come naturally to him. And so I think that's where St. Louis kind of has an advantage here is, look, you've got a rock-solid blue line all the way down your lineup. It's maybe not as great or as scary as some St. Louis blue lines have been in the past, but you look at it, and there's no holes there, like, at all.
No.
So they're going to be able to take care of business against Colorado as well as anybody can. And then you look at these forwards, and yes, you have the depth of scoring. Like I said, entering this playoffs, you got 9 guys get you 20 goals. That's incredible. You've got that depth of scoring. But you also look at all of those names, and all of them are good defensively. Like, there's no one on this roster that you look at and just go, yeah, that guy's just like pure offense. Like, even Tarasenko can defend. So I just think Colorado is not going to be able to do what they want to do, not going to be able to operate the way they're used to operating. And that wrench, again, I'll bring them up. I don't trust Bednar to help this team overcome that.
Exactly. Well said. And yeah, the forwards on matchups on the Avs D, that's going to be huge. I think Nashville just didn't really have the guys to contend with that. Cale Makar was able to kind of waltz into the zone on certain occasions and kind of have his way in the offensive zone. That's not going to be the case against St. Louis. On the blue line too, I think they've got that size, the Blues do, to give the Avs some fits physically. Guys like Robert Bortuzzo, Nico Mikkola, just really hard to contend with down behind the net, and the Avs forwards are going to get beat up over the course of a series, dealing with those two. And yeah, just the depth. That's going to be an issue for Colorado, and probably I think a worse matchup for them than if they were to face Minnesota, because the Avs are one of the deeper teams in the NHL. You could argue maybe the deepest. But if there's any team that can contend with that from a depth standpoint, it's St. Louis.
Exactly. So I've got one last question about St. Louis, though, for you, and that's who you starting in net.
I know you had Husso start the last series. Binnington came in and did well. I guess you've got to ride the guy who you were going with and have Binnington start. So I guess I would start Binnington, but give him a short leash. If anything really goes wrong, if he gets lit up, you can put Ville Husso in there and know he's going to do well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking, but I just think that's really the only. I look at this from for the Blues perspective. That's the only question. We know how they play. We know how they play in the playoffs. They're gonna go out there. They're gonna do that, and it's a process I trust in. On Colorado's side, I mean, is there anything that you can think of that you want to see them do? Do you think they should change things up at all going into this?
I think, yeah, they need to tighten things up a little bit. At least if the Nashville series was any indication, they were able to kind of play looser, more freewheeling
Mhm.
hockey because of the skill imbalance. I think, especially kind of some of the gaps that they left defensively, they're not going to be able to get away with against St. Louis. It'll be interesting to see how quickly that comes about as a problem. But I do think they need to tighten things up a little bit defensively. And I know you kind of want to play that up tempo skilled hockey if you're the Avs. That's
Mhm.
the kind of hockey that suits you. But I think St. Louis can match you every bit of the way there. You're going to have to do things a little bit different defensively. But more important is just the mental side of the game. And I know it's hard to quantify, but you're going to get punched in the face at some point,
Yeah.
in this series. You have to be able to roll with that. You look at the second round last year, and as soon as Vegas turned the tide, the momentum was just gone. You knew the Avs were
Mhm.
done. And so see if you can roll with a punch. It's a mental thing, but they have to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. And for St. Louis, they were able to survive Minnesota's offense at its best. Really, they looked fantastic through that series, and most especially, they were able to survive Minnesota's power play. And the fact that they were able to do that gives me confidence that they can survive whatever kind of attack Colorado throws at them. Um, Talking about the teams that they beat real quick, we'll go ahead and start with Nashville. Obviously, they get swept. Goaltending, the story here for them. But the one question I really want to ask you is this is a roster that every year limps into the playoffs. And really, how much longer can that keep going? You look at this core and you're talking about Matt Duchene, who rebounded fantastically this season, but 31 right now. Ryan Johansson has been okay. He's not been great. Obviously, not living up to that contract. Philip Forsberg, who's really your top guy in his prime, unrestricted free agent. Don't know if he's going to re-sign. Look on the blue line: Yossi, Ekholm, 31 each. And then you do have the goalie in Saros, who, when healthy, can be a difference maker for you. But I look at this team and I'm struggling to see what their future is other than this, where every year you barely make the playoffs and you just get bounced in the first round.
It does seem like that's kind of where this team is headed for a long time, but I don't know that they have any options to get out of that. I think they've already kind of made their decision. With Yossi locked up for as long as he is at that kind of money, Duchene, Johansson, Ekholm now, they're all locked up long term. I think those guys would be kind of difficult. I mean, you could move like a Yossi. Some team would pick him up
Yeah.
for that, price, but he's got the no move clause. I don't think he wants to leave. I don't think you really have the option there to have a whole lot of turnover. And also, if you were going to make that decision, then you should have traded Philip Forsberg at the deadline.
Yeah.
You, now you have to try and re-sign him. You have to do everything you can to try and re-sign Philip Forsberg. So I just don't know that they have another option.
Yeah, I don't either. It's gonna be interesting. We'll see what they figure out, and then Minnesota. So this is a really good Minnesota team. Obviously, you and I both thought, hey, if you get past St. Louis, you've got this kind of. I think we both believe in them a lot. You look at the players they have offensively; they're stacked with guys that maybe aren't like the most recognizable of names. They're not the names everybody points to around the NHL and says, "Oh yeah, that guy's fantastic offensive player." But they just go out there and they get it done. Talk about a blue line that can really kind of stand up and compete with just about anybody's out there. And they tried to have that great goalie tandem, Cam Talbot and Marc Andre Fleury. Didn't quite bail them out at times this series. What do you do if you're Minnesota? You're looking at this roster. You got to re-sign Kevin Fiala. But the big thing is the Zach Parise, Ryan Suter buyouts kick in a big way next year, where you're going to be carrying almost $13 million in dead cap space.
Yeah, the Wild are about to enter salary cap hell. And I feel for them. I really do, because this was supposed to be the kind of all in season before that started.
Mm-hmm.
You're just not going to be able to have as deep, as talented of a team these next two seasons as you were this season. Just financial constraints. I mean, no other team is dealing with this kind of this kind of dead money. It's really incredible what they're going to have to deal with. You're going to have to make some cuts somewhere. It's going to be really close. And I also feel for Minnesota, because I think they got dropped into a first round series that was featured the two best teams in the Western Conference.
Yeah.
That is one unfortunate side effect of this playoff system where you've got these 2v3 matchups where often I feel like you've got sometimes the two best teams in the conference facing each other in round one. And I think they held up to the Blues well, but St. Louis is just a damn good team.
Yeah.
So they're going to have to make some tough decisions. You probably want to re-sign Kevin Fiala, and you're probably going to do whatever you have to make that happen. That's going to mean moving on from a very good player. Probably Matt Dumba. That's the first name that I'm looking at.
Yep.
Unfortunately, I mean, he played through some terrible injuries in this first round, gutted it out. But yeah, I think Dumba's probably the one to go. If not, I guess Fiala. But you've got to cut money wherever you can, and there's just really no big place to do it. I don't think they can really afford to bring Marc-Andre Fleury back, but shouldn't be an issue with Jesper Wallstedt signing today. He should be a good low-cost backup.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think if you're Minnesota, you got to keep Fiala. I think he just helps that scoring and keeps you there. Matt Dumba is the one who makes sense. You look at that cap hit, it's going to be $6 million. Modified no trade clause, so you can move him, because you look at some of these other guys, Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, no move clauses. You're stuck with them for lack of a better
Zuccarello
term.
too.
Yeah, Zook too. So Dumba is the one that can move, and realistically, you're talking about a 1 year, $6 million cap hit. Somebody will take that on for Matt Dumba. I think they'll have the ability to do that. Maybe you retain some salary on it. The one benefit that they do have is, and this is before knowing what Fiala is going to sign for, you got 18 people, coming back, and you do have a little over $7 million in cap space. You can work with that and largely have this team come back next year and hopefully be as competitive as they were this year. But it's going to be kind of tough, and certainly the next couple of years are going to be rough too, because those buyouts only get bigger, start getting towards 15 million in dead money the next 2 seasons after this next one. So that's a little rough if you're them. All right, let's move on to the other Western Conference series, Battle of Alberta. RJ, wow. I mean, I can't believe we're getting this in the playoffs. I'm super excited for it. That being said, I have no idea what's going to happen in this series based on what we saw from these two teams having to go to game sevens against inferior opponents.
Exactly. I mean, both of these two teams didn't have the most impressive showing in the first round. Calgary, at least you could, I guess, say they got goalied because Jake Ottinger, fantastic first round series, the best player of the first round.
Oh yeah.
And Edmonton struggling with the LA Kings, who I think we both kind of agreed at the start of the playoffs was probably the worst playoff team of all 16. And the Oilers did struggle with them at times. It's going to be an interesting series. A lot of hatred, and I think we're just looking forward to seeing that. The Flames almost felt like they were ready to unleash that hatred for the Oilers against the Stars. I don't know.
Yeah.
It felt like they were gearing up for the Battle of Alberta 7 games in advance. It'd be interesting to see if they come out swinging or what happens there. But things are going to get heated probably right off the bat. But matchup wise, I think what it's going to come down to is the fact that Leon Draisaitl is playing on what's been reported to be a high ankle sprain, and he did not look like himself in Game 7. He gutted it out, but he didn't look like himself. I wonder, are they going to sit him for the start of the series? I mean, try and get him healed up a little bit, or is he just going to try and tough this whole thing out? But I don't know how effective the Oilers can be without both McDavid and Draisaitl at 100%.
Yeah, I was gonna say, in high ankle sprain, it's not really one that you can kind of quickly rest up and get over.
Right.
Like that's just gonna be there the rest of these playoffs for however long that goes for the Oilers. It's unfortunate too, because I kind of wanted to pick the Oilers here. Like I just kind of have this feeling like, what, this Oilers team does seem a little bit different. McDavid does seem a little bit different. They're finding that next level when they need to. Obviously, the same problems exist for this Oilers team as have for seasons now. which is goaltending. Mike Smith came up clutch when he absolutely needed to, but there were other times where he was not. And the blue line, it's not a great blue line. It can get outworked by teams, and oh boy, is Calgary going to outwork them. We know that. And so those two things still concern me. And yes, I feel like if Edmonton is going to win this one, they need both of their top two guys at full strength. And so without it, I'm going to say Calgary, but I do, I don't feel great about it. But I will say, yes, I think Calgary, now is the time to play like you were playing early on against Dallas, where you were, going in hard and heavy, and you were just banging bodies, trying to wear that other team down. Did not make sense against an inferior opponent like Dallas. Like, just go out there and straight up outscore them. Let Johnny Gaudreau be Johnny Gaudreau. Hey, guess what? When they finally did that, they won games, and he came through for them, especially in overtime of Game 7. But this might not be the time to do that. I don't know that Calgary can win the skill game against Edmonton. So it should be interesting. It's what is the NHL? How is the NHL going to officiate this, RJ? That's what I really want to know.
And that's going to make a big difference in this series too. I think, especially early on, the referees are going to go into it knowing where this series could be headed, and will probably try and establish a standard early on, maybe be a little tighter than they would otherwise be. Because they don't want things getting out of hand, especially with stuff after the whistle. I think if you get some scrums in game 1, in front of the net or whatever, you're going to have refs pulling 2 guys out of the pile and sending into the box just to send that message. I think you're going to try and get that early on. I I feel for whichever officials have to ref this series, especially the linesmen trying to keep guys apart, because it's going to be a tough job. That would be my guess as far as how they call it.
Yeah, I think you're probably spot on there. Season series for these two teams, 2-2, with the home team winning both of their home games. So, that could be a theme. That was kind of a theme we saw in round 1, where home teams were just kind of doing this, having that last change, being able to line match. Maybe that becomes the deciding factor here, in which case, obviously, that favors Calgary. But it'll be interesting to see, because very similar to the last series we talked about. Obviously, 2-2 as far as the results. 17 goals for the Flames, 16 for the Oilers. So again, you're talking about scores that were close. Well, in theory, that were close over the series. Unlike that last one where all the games were close, this series was more blowouts for the home team. That was kind of how it went. So we'll see how that plays out here in the playoffs. But I'm excited for this one. Looking at the opponents that they beat, Dallas. Oh, go ahead.
Real quick, I didn't get my prediction for the series.
Yeah.
I do think the Flames will edge it out, and mostly also because goaltending. I think Mike Smith is just going to be different to deal with than Jake Ottinger. Yeah. But yeah, I've got the Flames in this one.
Yeah. Look, speaking of Jake Ottinger, that's where we're going. Dallas, that he was the story. He was fantastic. I mean, I do think Dallas played pretty well too. Like, the rest of the team played well, but obviously, certainly, you look at like that Game 7 performance from Ottinger. Arguably like the greatest playoff goaltending performance I have ever seen. You know what I mean? Like, it absolutely incredible.
Yep. And over the course of the series, I believe he had the most goals saved above expected of any goalie in a playoff series, dating back to 07, 08. And I don't know if those stats go back before that. It just an incredible series, what he was able to do. And we talked about it at the start of the series. Dallas is a one-line team. They never stopped being a one-line team in this series. Although I will say the other 3 lines really did step up to make sure that kind of nothing happened one way or another when they were on the ice, allowing Robertson and Hintz and Pavelski to kind of get their spots where they could have those big goals and let the team carry them. That's exactly how you want to play if you're a one-line team, and I thought they did that well.
Yeah, and they had guys step up in certain games when they absolutely needed them to. Sagan, Ben.
Yeah. Michael Raffl, I noticed him all over the place this series.
He was good. My boy, Nemestikov. Like, they had guys, step up and help out. That D is incredible. They're going to miss Klingberg a lot. But I guess really looking at, the future for Dallas, it's just how much are you giving Otter?
Yeah, whatever it takes. Yeah, he's someone that they've committed to drafting in the first round. If you do that, you're sold on the guy. He's panned out as well as they could have hoped. You've got to pay him and lock him down long term. I think that's what they're going to do. And the Stars, I think they're a good candidate to kind of like rebuild, refresh on the fly. Like
Yeah.
Sagan and Ben are no longer driving the bus here. We know that, but they're still decent depth pieces. And then you've got some good prospects too. What Wyatt Johnson looks really, really good. He should be coming in soon. And they just kind of refresh with the younger guys.
Yeah, again, the other guy, I guess they got to figure out how to pay, how much they're paying him is Robertson. Like that one's going to be interesting too.
That's another whatever it takes one.
I was going to say it's possible I could see maybe both him and Ottinger re-upping on bridge deals.
I could see
Maybe
that
like,
too.
okay, show us more than just like the year, and then we'll give you the big money, and that could only help Dallas kind of retool on the fly like that. And then by the time you got to really pay them, maybe some of those bigger contracts coming off the books for you. I think the future's pretty bright for Dallas. I think they're in a good spot. Going to have over $18 million in cap space. 15 guys already locked down and signed. They're in good shape. Looking at the LA Kings, all season long, this has just been they're ahead of schedule kind of season. So for them, just keep doing what you're doing and you're going to get there, right?
Exactly. Successful year, playing with house money all season long. And I think also if you have Drew Doughty in that series, you win it if you're the Kings.
Yeah.
And it might not even be particularly close. Yeah, they're excited about the team's future. They have good reason to be. Lots of young prospects coming up. They're going to be good for a long time, and this will just give them valuable experience going forward.
Exactly. The big thing for them is just going to be, addressing the blue line, maybe trying to find some depth there beyond Doughty so that if, he has to miss time, you're not kind of stuck in the situation you were this year. But again,
right,
lots of cap space to do that if you're the Kings looking at next season. All right, go to the East, Battle of Florida. Excited for this one, RJ. You and I have kind of been feeling different about this one since the playoffs started. Got the Panthers taking on the Lightning. I mean, tell me why the Lightning are going to be able to do this for another year, RJ.
Because the Panthers are pretty beat up. Looking at Aaron Ekblad at the end of that first round series, clearly hurting.
Watch.
It is. It's hard. It's so hard to watch it, knowing how hard he's worked to after that big injury in the middle of the season to even get back to the point where he can play now. And he is such a big part of that team. Ekblad is, and also because the Panthers just didn't look right in the first round. The Capitals kind of gave a good blueprint for how you can defend Florida if you take away these rush chances. I think overall the Panthers were skilled enough that they were able to break through, but Tampa's a much better team than the Capitals. And they know exactly what they need to do. They've shown over these last couple years too that they can play whatever style of hockey they need to win, and that's just a hallmark of some of the really great teams, some of the dynasties in whatever sport too. I mean, they almost remind me of like Belichick's Patriots, where they'll switch from a 3-4 to a 4-3, whatever they need to do to beat you. They know how they need to play, and again, they showed what they're made of in that series against Toronto. That just took a lot of guts to win that series, because that Leafs team was different. We'll talk about them later, but that's why I think Tampa's gonna win this series. But I don't know, Florida's not out of it. I think Tampa did show some vulnerabilities in that Leaf series.
Yeah, and Tampa looks a little banged up as well. I think they said Braden Point's gonna be. Did they say doubtful or game time for game one? It sounds like he's not playing game one.
Right, and I mean, I'm not surprised after watching that. Yeah, you talk about just painful to watch. How about that one shift coming back, trying to play through it after his injury in Game 7? I hated watching that whole thing.
Yeah, that was extremely difficult to watch. For Florida, I just feel like this is the best the Panthers have been. It might be the best they're going to be as well. I just think that, yes, Washington showed what you can do. Washington took advantage of, starting hot and Florida not in a lot of those games. But you know what? Florida was able to come back in a lot of those games and just, be the better team. And sometimes that's, you just got to do that. I also think none of those games are nearly as close if the Florida power play does literally anything. Anything. And I don't see that being the case for 2 series in a row. I just don't believe that a team with this many skilled players can be so ineffective on a power play for 2 series in a row. I look at Tampa. I've been saying it all along. I highlighted it Round two, this is where we're going to see Vasilevsky, the wheels start to come off a little bit. We'll see if that's the case. But I do think that Tampa is vulnerable. I think this is as vulnerable as they're going to get. If you're this Panthers team and you want to prove that you're actually as good as your record was this year and that your time is now, this is the time to do it. It's to smell blood in the water and go for it. And I think that they're going to. I think that they've learned their lessons from round one. They proved to themselves that, hey, we can start off bad and come back. We did it multiple times. Regardless of what happens, Verhaeghe's got our back. And and
how about Carter Verhaeghe in that series?
Absolutely incredible. So good. And I think they're going to do it. I do think that the Ekblad thing's going to be something worth monitoring, because I will say in that last game that Florida won where he was hurt, he was still their best defenseman. I couldn't believe how many times I was saying, what a play by Ekblad, as he's, barely able to stand up. You know what I mean? But he was making the difference. He was keeping pucks in the zone. He was getting pucks out of the zone. He is just that good. So I do think that his health is going to play a big role in this. It's going to be interesting. If you're Tampa, do you play Florida just the same way you played Toronto? Knowing that, okay, transition is going to be how they're trying to attack us. Like, let's just try to limit that as best we can.
Yeah, I think pretty similarly. And you look at Game 7 as a good blueprint for that. Mm-hmm. I think at times in the series, Tampa fed Toronto's transition too much. They weren't careful with the puck in the offensive zone, and it led to a lot of transition chances the other way. But they really cleaned that up when it mattered in Game 6 and most importantly in Game 7. So I think that's kind of the blueprint that they should go with, and they've showed they're capable of doing it.
Yeah, and I will say I trust the depth at forward of Tampa more than I trust the depth at forward for Florida. And that could potentially be the differing factor here, just kind of like it was in that Toronto series. At the end of the day, look who got it done for Tampa in Game 7, right?
Nick Paul.
Exactly. So, and we've seen that from this Tampa team these past 2 cup runs. So it'll be an exciting one to see for sure. Let's go ahead and just start with the Capitals, just because it's probably a little bit of an easier conversation to have. If you're the Capitals, obviously your core is aging, but as long as they're around, you got to go for it. I just don't know that there's enough they can do to retool this roster to really be a top competitive team come next year's playoffs.
Yeah, I don't know what else they can really do. Retool is just the right word, because that's the extent of what you can do. But you've got to compete whenever you've got Alex Ovechkin and playing as well as he is. Some bad news on Nicholas Backstrom. Sounds like whatever surgery he's going to have this offseason, going to be a really tough recovery. Probably won't be ready for the start of next season. That's going to hurt them quite a bit. But that's all you can do. And you've still got guys that are even on the older side that just keep stepping up. Ovechkin first and foremost.
Oh, yeah.
But TJ Oshie looked amazing in that series. And, you wonder how long he can keep that up. But I don't doubt him at this point, with how well he was playing at 35. The older guys are going to continue to have to drive the bus, and it probably will crash pretty dramatically at some point. But until that happens, you got to keep going for it.
Look at you trying to make references to my McKinnon draft day stories with bus crashes. And it's really that way all the way down this lineup. Lars Eller, another good series. Connor Sheary, another good series. Like they got good guys. Laviolette's Laviolette. Like he can do it. It's just one of those. You're just going for it, and you crossing your fingers, hoping you get a little bit of magic come playoff time. Toronto, this was it. This was supposed to be the year. And really, it looked like it was going to be through much of this series.
Yeah, as much as it feels hollow and empty at this point, with them having lost another Game 7, this year's team actually did kind of feel different. I was convinced. And as much as I wanted to kind of pile on they're going to do the same thing again, I really did think there was a chance it wouldn't happen.
Yeah, no, I know I'm a little surprised. I thought that they had Tampa's number. It looked that way to me. I thought it was going to be, towards the end there, okay, Tampa was adjusting. They were making adjustments, but I thought for Game 7, Toronto was going to come out with adjustments and answers for that and kind of get it done, and it just wasn't there for them. I don't know what you do, though, because this doesn't feel like the flame out disasters that you've had in the past. This was, well, dang, we ran into the back-to-back Stanley Cup champions, and they still have that core together, and they still got an amazing coach, and they just kind of straight up beat us, but we took them for everything that they had. Like,
Hmm.
I think you could, if I'm Toronto, I kind of just run it back, right?
Right. I would too. And as much as when we were talking about this at maybe like the trade deadline, we're talking, okay, well, if they flame out in the first round again, you've got to make some big changes. But given what happened, I think they would be stupid to kind of clean house and make those decisions. I think that would be overreacting. You have to run it back at this point, and I don't know that you can run into a Tampa team like that next season.
No.
They're going to be so burned out. I think you've got to take your chances on getting a better first round opponent. I guess if it happens again next year, maybe you
Yeah.
you make some big changes. But yeah, and the thing is, the star players, they more or less did their job. Last season they
Yep.
didn't, and that's what's so frustrating about it for the Leafs too. Is every year it's a different thing.
Yep.
It's not the same problem that you can point to and address. I mean, 2 seasons ago, it was the lack of depth. They had, did
Mm-hmm.
not have the depth forwards to get it done. Last year, they refreshed everything. They brought in new depth guys. They brought in, Simmons and Spezza and all that, and they did great for them. And the stars didn't show up.
Mm-hmm.
And then this year, the stars showed up. They actually played pretty well, and you just most really are left looking at your opponent.
Yeah.
Um, but I think there still is that mental side of it too, because you look at the lead that they had in Game 6,
Mm-hmm.
where you score those 2 goals at the end of the period, and I figure, okay, they're finally going to get it done. This one's over. Where you should hang on to that lead, and I do think there is a mental side of it that makes you unable to lock things down in the way that Tampa can, and that they showed that they can do. And I don't know how you fix that.
New coach. Better coach.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. I've always been critical of Keefe, but that's just me. Last and final thing about Toronto. What do you do with Jack Campbell? Because
Yeah,
obviously,
it's
like
tough.
you don't have a ton of cap space to work with. You gotta bring some people back and make some decisions. Jack Campbell, he looked good for you, he kept you in the series, but he's gonna want the payday that he deserves. He's 30. This is gonna be his last chance at it, and it sounds like from what we were hearing today, especially, they're kind of far apart.
Right. And I don't blame Campbell one bit for this. This is
No.
his chance to get paid.
Yeah.
And I think it is going to depend on what Campbell wants. He's going to probably have to take a discount to stay in Toronto. And I wouldn't blame him for not doing that. And I think you kind of made your choice already about whether to bring Campbell back or not, given how this team is structured. You've got the big three in their or big four in their contracts. You paid Peter Mrazek 3.8 over 2 more years.
Yeah.
That really boxes you in. I don't think they're going to be able to afford to keep him. I guess good news for the Leafs there is that goaltending is weird. It's kind of random,
Yeah.
and Jack Campbell was a major reason that they were in this series against Tampa. They
Mm-hmm.
finally got some really good goaltending, but given the nature of goaltending, you can't guarantee at all that he
Nope.
would do that for you next season. So I think you've got to go cheap and roll the dice.
Yeah, it'll be interesting what that pairing of Mrazek and Shalgren looks like. We'll see if it's enough. I mean, that's just gonna be it. But yeah,
I
I think
suppose you can always add at the deadline if it's not.
true. I just think ultimately it's gonna come down to, yeah, as you said earlier, who you draw in the first round, and you just gotta hope that you know you don't run into Tampa again. Which unfortunately I could see that being the case. It's just I think next year Tampa for sure. There's just no way they can stay the same. I just can't believe it.
Right?
I know. Um, all right, so final second round series to talk about here: Carolina Hurricanes, New York Rangers. Do the Rangers have a shot?
I think they do. If Shesterkin is going to play the way that he's been playing, I think they've got a shot. Never rule out the goaltending. And also, I think you look at the Hurricanes. They went 7 games against a Bruins team that, like, let's be honest, we talked about it a couple games
Mm-hmm.
in, looked like they were kind of done. The Bruins, I will talk about it later, what it means for their future, but I wasn't all that convinced that the Canes are for real and they're ready to go out and, and win a cup. in the first round series. So I think the Rangers are going to put up a good fight. It feels like another one of those. We said this in the Rangers Penguins series, where if the Penguins are going to win, they'd have to land a quick knockout blow. That if the series goes a long time, the Rangers' chances just keep getting better and better. And I think that's the case again here.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I believe in this Carolina group over this Rangers group. You look at this Rangers group, and the Penguins at times pretty much manhandled them. Like, this is a Rangers group that just lost the ability to defend for whole periods at a time. They forgot how to win a face-off for whole games at a time. And I just think Carolina is a team that can take advantage of those two things in particular. And that's where I think things are going to come down to. Shesterkin played as well as he could. He was just facing like this barrage of shots and good chances because his defense just was not helping him out at all. So you look at it, he's got a terrible goals against average from that series, but still a .911 save percentage, which is not bad, all things considered. So it's one of those weird things with them. I just think the Rangers have weird ways of scoring, and I don't it'll
That's for sure.
It's just going to be an interesting I know it's just going to be an interesting matchup to see what how Brind'Amour wants to handle the Rangers attack. Also sounds like Freddie Anderson could be coming back for the second round, and I think if that happens, depending on how ready to go he is, if he comes back and he's just playing like he was in the regular season for them, I think I would feel pretty good about Carolina landing that knockout punch early on in this one.
If he can replicate how he was playing this regular season, it's over. Just because, I mean, that was some elite level goaltending.
Yeah.
I always do wonder about a goalie coming in kind of cold off an injury in a playoff series. And I thought Ranta played pretty well.
Yeah.
Not great, but he played all right. He did well in that spot. And it's a tough spot to be in a series like that. But yeah, we'll see. I think we'll know a lot after the first couple games. But then again, we thought we knew a lot in that Canes series after a couple games too. So
yeah, I mean,
can the Canes get a road win? They don't need one, but can they get one?
MSG is a heck of a place to try to find your first one. I'll tell you that. Yep. It'll be interesting. Really for the Rangers, it's just can you figure out a way to limit chances and just be better defensively? And I just don't know that this group has the guys to do that on the blue line. Mm-hmm. That's really my thing with them. So I know there's not like a ton of elite level analysis for this one. It's just kind of, show us.
Exactly. I mean, I think really all four teams in the East coming into the second round were a little underwhelmed by their first round series performance. Yeah. And this series, more than any other, I think just kind of relies on feels as far as predicting it. And my feels tell me the Rangers, and that's what I'm going with.
All right, I'll go with Carolina. I think this is their year to at least get to a conference final. Go for it.
All right. Well, we'll see whose instincts are better.
Yeah, I know. It's not great. I don't feel great about it, but at the same time, I feel more strongly about them than the Rangers. Looking at the teams they beat, Boston, you alluded to it earlier. Was this it?
It sure feels like it does, and especially watching Patrice Bergeron kind of give everyone a hug like they're on the way off the ice. And I know they'd probably do that anyway because no one knows for sure. He hasn't made a decision yet, but it feels like the end of the line, and especially just given where the whole team is at. He spoke with the media today at the locker cleanout and everything, and made it clear he doesn't want to play anywhere else. So if he is coming back, it's just Boston. I could see him re-upping for maybe a season or two, seeing if they can do one last run with this group. But I don't know. I don't see how this team gets better in the short term.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, the way to get better is to add more scoring and have better forward depth, but I don't know how that happens in the short term exactly. Like, it just doesn't. They just have never been able to figure out this second line center spot, and that's just been the death of them year after year here for a little bit. The blue line
coax Krejci out of retirement.
I know
that's the way to do it.
You should just do that every year when you make the playoffs. Like, just bring him in for the playoffs and roll with it. Like, that's the way to do it. Every year it seems like this blue line slowly gets more and more whittled away. and that hasn't helped you. Goaltending this year I don't
Yeah.
know that Olmark's really your guy. That's gonna pull out probably 2 or 3 series is what it would take for him to pull out to win you a
Yeah.
cup. I don't see it. This is just the end of the line for a team that was remarkably successful and arguably should have more rings on their fingers.
Exactly. Yeah, and you've got a couple really close final series that, if those two go the other way, you're talking about a dynasty for the Bruins and a real great run with this group. And I think they're not just going to go straight to the basement of the league next
No.
season. And between Olmark and Swayman, that's a good enough goalie tandem if
Yeah.
you got enough good stuff in front of it. You got some underrated defensemen. I mean, how about Charlie McAvoy,
Yeah.
like in this series, and Matt Grzelcyk, some really underrated guys. But I agree with your assessment as a whole.
Yeah. So we'll see. We'll see. Maybe having Lindholm there for a full season. I still think they're a playoff team just because half the teams make the playoffs.
Yep.
Right? Like at some point you can just
They have too much talent not to be. Yeah.
Yeah, very much like their other wild card team in the East, the Washington. Like it's not a great team, but it's going to be a playoff team just because, like, come on.
Yeah.
How could it not be? All right, Pittsburgh. They did everything that they could. I think if Crosby's there for Game 6, they take that series at home. Rangers did not look like they could beat them in Pittsburgh, and they certainly didn't look like they could beat them really with Crosby until they did, I guess, Game 7. But if you're the Penguins, the big questions are Malkin, Letang. What's going on with them?
Hard to say. We were talking about this a little bit before recording. Just like, what do you see them doing? I know you mentioned you could see them potentially all just kind of re-upping for one more year and try and go at it again because they feel like they're close. I bet they do. And I think they know that if Crosby had not gotten injured, they're on to the second round with a good chance to go further than that. It just feels like they're so close. Or, heck, if Tristan Jarry was healthy going into the playoffs, so many what ifs for this Penguins team. And it feels like they still have what it takes to go deep if they can keep this core together.
1,000%. If you're not relying on your third string Tendy through basically the entire series, you don't have the injury to Crosby, all that stuff. I mean, look, Crosby was unbelievably dominant in this one. Gensel, 8 goals in those 7 games. Like, he's incredible. He just finds a way to step it up whenever they need him. It'll be interesting. I'm getting the feeling that everybody's got to look at that result and feel like, okay, I think we can do this again. Be interesting to see what, if they decide to do that, what those guys re-up for. Do they maybe take discounts and all of a sudden you can add around them and maybe try to bolster this team a little bit for next year? Because the one place I look at, really, this is a team that somehow always makes their blue line work regardless of whatever bits and pieces they have going on back there. I think that's a big credit to Mike Sullivan on that one and his coaching staff. But it's the depth scoring. Crosby, when he wasn't out there, they just had no one who could help drive possession really for them, and that's what killed them, because Malkin is not the same. Injuries have clearly limited his ability. He is much more of an east-west player than a north-south one at this point. If you watch him, kind of reminds me of Lurch, those high shoulders he's got and that big frame, the way he kind of stalks around the offensive zone. It's kind of fun, but I like the way he's adjusted, but he's not really your second line go-to guy anymore. He's not going to drive possession anymore. It's just not what he's able to do physically. So if you're Pittsburgh, you got to find an answer to that. Jeff Carter's been good at that, but again, he's going to be 38 next year.
Right. I mean, how much longer can you rely on him doing his thing?
So it's interesting. I get the feeling everybody's going to come back. I didn't get the sense that after that Game 7 loss, everybody was ready to say goodbye. That was it. That was not like you mentioned.
That wasn't the feel
Bergeron. Yeah, Bergeron kind of hugging everybody. You could kind of see that being the end. This very much felt like no. We got unfinished business. We left stuff on the table here. So, be interesting to see for sure. And just like that, we've covered it. Second round.
We have.
Yeah, let's go. I'm super pumped for these matchups. As we talked about them, a lot of them pretty close. We're on differing sides of some, or like the case of Calgary Edmonton.
Exactly. We've got Battle of Alberta, Fight for Florida, whatever you want to call it. That Avs Blues series could easily be better than the other two.
Yep.
And then a really weird Carolina Rangers series. I'm really excited for all four of them.
Yeah, I can't wait to see just the incredibly odd ways both Carolina and Rangers figure out how to score, because it's gonna be weird. It is not gonna be conventional looking at all.
Yeah, no, we can't finish this podcast without quickly talking about that Jake Gensel goal
Oh my
in Game
gosh,
7.
so good, so good. I
I'm
mean,
like, this is a beautiful goal if it counts, is all I was
I
thinking.
know
I'm like, and it looked like a high stick to
it
me,
did, it did.
but part of me was just like, okay, just let it count because it's such a great skill play and it'll be great just for the whole game and for the league and everything. So yeah, kind of glad it counted there.
Yeah, no, just incredible. The whole sequence, him trying to collect it, kicking it up to himself, knocking it down from, yeah, basically face height, it looked like, realistically. But getting it done, like I said, when do we start talking about that guy? Like, that guy deserves national attention. All he does is go out there and score 40 in a full season. Be
Yep.
good in the playoffs. Like, I don't know. He deserves a lot of credit for what the Penguins are able to do year in, year out, and really, really skilled guy. So happy to see it. But I think that's going to do it for this episode of the Red Glare podcast, RJ. Had a lot of fun. I always like doing these, getting able to talk about stuff league-wide, being able to talk about playoffs, and how great has it been, RJ, to have fans in the building for these playoff series, all of them, be there for these Game 7s, the huge crowds outside all the arenas, particularly those ones up in Canada. It's been amazing to see.
Yes, and something we so sorely missed the last couple years. It's really not playoff hockey without it.
Yep.
Just an awesome atmosphere. I mean, you saw the people outside in Calgary over that Game 7. Just awesome, taking advantage of some good weather. I'll leave you with one question though. What like arena atmosphere did you think was the most electric, the one that was buzzing the most in the whole first round?
Might be MSG. Like those games were intense, and it really felt like if you were the Penguins, you were working against the Rangers, and you were working against, however many thousand people were in there, 18, 19,000 people as well.
Yep, that's a really good answer, and I like that one. And for me, another one that stood out, and they've been doing this for a little while, Carolina.
Yeah.
Yep, Carolina in that series, just great atmosphere, and to have the two of them going at it in the second round. Talk about home ice advantage.
Yeah, I thought really both teams in that Carolina-Boston series, there's a reason the home teams won all those games.
Yes, for sure.
Those were definitely.
It's not just the line matching.
Yeah, no, those were good ones. So it'll be fun to watch. Can't wait to one day have it in Seattle. Oh,
yes,
gosh.
I was thinking that too. It's going to be electric. It's going to be its own unique brand, of energy. And so excited to one day be able to cover that.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. Can't wait. And it's been nice to have a kind of classic vintage style playoffs in which the Golden Knights aren't there, as we anxiously await whether or not they can bring in Barry Trotz. It's kind of the coaching white whale of the moment. We'll
Gotta
see
leave
if
me
they
with
can
that
do it.
thought, huh?
I got to bookend.
I was having a good time.
I know, but you got to bookend the podcast. That's what all the top people do. So I'm told.
All right. Well,
so, there we go.
You can be the top people.
Hey, this is a heck of a lot smoother than the deep dive. So
that's for sure.
All right. And on that note, we'll leave it. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you all next time.